And we are live, and welcome back. Session 3 of this series on disruptive leadership with Paul McCarthy. And first of all, apologize, we're running half an hour late for this session, mainly because, as I was saying to Paul before we went live, my calendar's like a plate of spaghetti right now, and I'm also feeling a bit kind of head coldy. But anyway, that's that's me over and done with. So Paul, how are you?
Yeah, thank you. Similar to you, backstage we were obviously talking about that, and yeah, lots going on. And it's be careful what you wish for syndrome, I think, because Absolutely. As you start to open Pandora's box on a lot of this stuff, more and more people are interested. So it means more and more of our time devoted to these conversations. So yeah, no, going well, busy, tired, but really excited about this conversation as well.
Yeah, perfect. So let's get into this, and let's get as you put out a post about this session. Let's get into focus on a deeper dive into the role of the disruptive leader. So deeper dive into the role of the disruptive leader, and the actual value that this kind of leadership can bring to an organization. And the first thing I just want to ask is, change. It's not a huge word, change, right? But it's everything, because when you think about it, there is no roadmap for certainty forget about business life, but certainly in business, there's no roadmap for definite success, right? There's no algorithm that will guarantee a business goes from A to B, and then this is the journey to take. So, and you say that disruptive leaders act as catalysts for change. Maybe describe what you mean by that, the extent of change, maybe areas they shouldn't be going into. Let's talk a little bit about change, first of all, Paul.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great jumping off point. And, I think part of the other session we did was to dispel some of the myths around disruptive leaders, because they seem to be quite troublesome and in a negative way. And I think this is a good way of balancing that by showing actually disruptive leaders in general, not all of them, but they're driven by, as I said before, a greater sense of purpose, which helps them evolve their organization and people within it quicker. And so they're constantly a source of new ideas. So they come up with new ideas that are driven to evolve the organization. They excel in environments where there's prototyping, where there needs to be agility, where because they have this ability to transform quickly, because they're adaptable and they're agile, they can actually use that attitude and philosophy to change to actually inspire and motivate people around them. So they build trust quickly, and again, what's driving that in terms of their ability to respond to change is that they see the bigger picture. They can connect the dots quicker, and they're driven, underpinning by that sense of purpose, right? So they're the exact people that you need if you can treat them in the way, like if you can understand them, how to motivate them, how to engage them, how to keep them. They're your biggest advocates. They're your biggest sponsors, your ambassadors, and they're the people that are going to, because they build trust quickly, they're going to keep the troops on the ground moving in the direction of the vision that the change is hoping to achieve. So again, there's a lot in there, but they are the people, they're the unsung heroes in organizations. And if we can just get past this label of disruptive being a bad thing, we can see so much opportunity, Simon, to leverage them in the organization that they're currently sitting in.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's so many angles I can take to this discussion. I guess the first jumping off point is, you and I in our private conversations, and you're probably more public about this, we've both been kind of told in our careers to slow down, to be less disruptive, to be less change driven and maybe slightly more risk averse. And that comes from insecurities and fears and a status quo thinking. But how do you balance this need for this disruptive leadership and inevitable change, and having a plan for change, setting goals, defining change, articulating challenges, adjusting, and then moving forward? How do you balance that with the fact that inherently business can be kind of risk averse because of the shareholder structure, because of those old ways of thinking? How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, it's an interesting question that I actually faced yesterday, Simon. As you know, backstage, I've been kind of beta testing what the world's first program on disruptive leadership, and we kicked it off yesterday with a client that's considering being one of our alliance partners globally. And they asked the question early on, which was, what do we mean by disruptive leader? And we we started to go into it, even though it was not part of the module that we were working on at that time. And what came out in that conversation was a misunderstanding of the term, firstly, but secondly, this conversation point you're sparking now, which was, do we need all leaders to be disruptive all of the time? First, when you have that compliance-driven mentality versus that non-compliance driven mentality, there are
Yeah.
times when being a disruptive leader or non-leader are not appropriate, and there are times when it is. And I wouldn't, I'm not going to try and kind of fob anyone off by deflecting this question, but what I would say is this kind of comes into our next episode, which is number 4, about how does the organization itself determine how it identifies, recruits, onboards, and develops those types of leaders. So everything needs to be based around the organizational sense of vision, purpose, their values, and how does that leader who's disruptive fit in to that ecosystem? Because if they don't have the same values, they're not going to join or stay. And we quoted, I think, earlier in one of our episodes about purpose-driven organizations retain. In fact, DDI say they retain is 2.4 times more likely to stay in the organization for longer if you can align their purpose with the organizations. So I think there's no blueprint for this. There's no one size fits all. I think every organization of every different sector, profit-driven startup ventures will be different than education ventures, professional services firms. They'll all have unique values and propositions. So I think it's really important to understand, firstly, what is the role that you want that leader to play, right, in the organization. I'm not suggesting, by the way, to anyone listening, that we blanket organizations with disruptive leaders. Every leader has to be disruptive. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that they and the way they think are the future. So how do you integrate them into your individual organization? It's like when you buy a new pair of shoes. You have a shoehorn to help fit your unique feet with those shoes. Everyone will be different. So whilst there are checkpoints and there's checklists and tools that we can help organizations to integrate those leaders in, it's an individual journey. And so I would ask the question, what are those organizations motivated by? Is it profit over purpose? And how do these leaders help accordingly?
Yeah, no, I think a great point, and you're making me recall, and I can't remember the different terms, but the Disney method. That in every organization you need at least 3 different types. You need an idea generator, which is kind of more around the disruptive thinking, and then you need an engineer to validate, and then you need somebody to question, and then it goes back to the idea generator. And so you do need different types of people in different organizations to kind of squeeze through the best outcome. What about the whole concept of listening, right? And so, I do a bit of training around change management, and one of the 7 key aspects of change is listening carefully, and employees are going to have, regardless of how disruptive you are as a leader, employees are going to have questions, ideas, feelings, and emotions. And so it's, in my view, it's really important for, leaders to openly and actively listen, and to be able to have the tools to validate what they're thinking, and then address them as clearly, as frankly as possible. So is that another inevitable and essential attribute of valuable disruptive leaders, the ability to really listen and explain and substantiate what they believe in?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I alluded to earlier in this episode was that disruptive leaders can build trust quickly, and they do that by listening. They do that by creating the conditions to have conversations that matter. Meaningful connections and partnerships are formed by a disruptive leader's ability to understand people's motivations and to understand what kind of gets them out of bed, what their perspectives are, their value sets. And so you can't build unless anyone disagrees with me, I've never seen this in a leadership team or with any leaders. You can't build trust if you can't listen.
Absolutely.
And you can't build trust quickly, which disruptive leaders do, unless you're highly emotionally intelligent and highly evolved in terms of the way that you approach problem solving, ideation, and are driven by something bigger. So I would say listening is one of the key attributes that a disruptive leader has. And again, this kind of spins the idea of this concept on its head, because you think of disruptive leaders and the first thing you think of is negative.
Yeah.
But what if we reframe that to say, actually, your disruptive leaders are your biggest ambassadors, because they create the space, like Amy Edmondson from Harvard talks about psychological safety, creating the fertile soil. These are the kinds of leaders that do that. And I keep coming back to it in conversations with you as well as others. Nothing will move forward with this conversation in general until or unless people are open to addressing their own biases about what this term resonates for them.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so absolutely. And it's having that courage and mainly courage to question your own biases. People often talk about, there are 200 or 300 different types of biases, and I see so much training around, how can you help others navigate their own bias? But we are all driven by our own biases. Like we use hindsight too critically or whatever it is, and I think there's a fear to really tap into your own mindset. And I see Kuldeep is saying communication and strong IPR would help disruptive leadership. I often say everything is communication. Everything we watch, read, hear, everything we remember, even everything we forget is communication. Once something's out there, it's communicate. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so one of the things that I found in Korn Ferry's research, the self-disruptive leader, and they wrote this piece in 2019, I think, and I've leveraged some of it for my work and built upon many of its kind of ideas in there and contradicted some of them and generated new ideas from their work. Disruptive leaders, they can anticipate what's on the horizon, right? So tying in the idea to listen and to communicate effectively, they're able to make decisions quickly because they're able to contextually bring in a lot of the different intelligences, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, IQ, and they're able to use that to create opportunities. And this is what Korn Ferry talks about in terms of a disruptive leader is someone that anticipates, and they're the person that they can help provide direction in a time of turbulence. Again, change often results in that. So they're the person that can bring things in quickly, assimilate them, process them, and communicate complex thoughts and ideas, not just in a way that articulates them, but also articulates potential solution tracks.
Yeah.
And again, they're the kind of leader that you need when you're prototyping, when you're doing MVP, like when you're in minimal viable product kind of work. You want this kind of leader because they can get things done quickly, and their drive energizes other people, and they tap into that sense of purpose. So it's all about listening, and as we know, listening is a form of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me, there's a quote, which I haven't got it in my head, I'm reading it, but listening is an art that requires attention over talent, spirit over ego, and others over self. And that's Dean Jackson. And, I think you've really hit at the core of all this. I mean, I do a lot of training around listening and communication skills, and leaders are only as good as the way they communicate and other people perceive. And, listening builds, it doesn't just facilitate good communication. It builds strong relationships. It allows for conflict resolution or management. It allows for identifying or eking out the right growth opportunities, problem solving, teamwork, collaboration, emotional intelligence, all of these things. And so I think this really is at the core of it. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was you talk about disruptive leaders are agile in how they preempt and act in complex situations. And so maybe tell us a little bit more about agility. I mean, again, there's no algorithm, right? there's no single determined speed for leaders, is there? Tell us more about that.
Well, you mentioned the word ego in something you just said there, and and this, I'm going to tie this into agility and adaptability that disruptive leaders are characterized by, because they see opportunities to transform and to transform quickly and bring everyone along with them. They're not. We've all worked in organizations where we've had people that are reluctant to change and change their role, and they stay in their defined role. This is everything they do, their job description, their bullet points. This is what they do. And we know that being agile and that don't mix well. So in this new world that we live in, which I would argue isn't really new, we've been working like this anyway, but COVID has shone the light and accelerated a lot of these conversations quicker. But because disruptive leaders are not driven by ego, remember, biggest sense of purpose, they're not driven by ego. So they're driven by what's better for the organization, right? And because of that, they're able to hop from one role to another role relatively quickly, because they're not attached with anything around, ego-driven motivations. And so I say that quite firmly, because the research, again, from Korn Ferry and some other sources, I mean, I think it was Heidrick and Struggles, one of the largest executive headhunters in the world. And this is pre-pandemic, Simon. They said that a leader's ability to disrupt will have the strongest effect on that leader's potential. So just think about that for a moment, right? Yeah. And to be able to disrupt means you need to be able to see things, different things coming at you. And if it doesn't resonate with the bigger purpose, bigger picture, you need to refine it, drop it, move on. And so you need to be agile at the heart of that, and not drawn into any of the political conversations, the role profile discussions. And really, because of that, disruptive leaders are able to create the conditions to build teams and to sustain teams to deliver bigger picture solutions. I see we get a few comments in the box at the moment.
Yeah, no, great comments. And that brings me kind of onto mindset as well. It kind of drives me a bit demented and I do a lot of work around, the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset, which is all great and they're real and we all have a combination. But I think it's missing a trick, because there's other mindsets that real leaders need to have. One of them is not having a deluded mindset, right? You can't be deluded, otherwise you're going to lose followers. But you need to have an entrepreneurial mindset. You need to have a barometer of risk, right? Getting out of bed in the morning is a risk, right? So good entrepreneurs have a set sense of how far they can push it. You need to have what I call a positive mindset, but not deluded. And you need to have what I call, a challenge-based mindset. You need to have a sense of that, uncertainty is inevitable, right? And so if you combine those, growth, entrepreneurial, this positive but non-deluded, and challenge-based, there's a lot there, right? I mean, already we're demonstrating that it's no wonder there aren't armies of great leaders out there, because this are great disruptive leaders, because, this is not easy, is it? I mean, there's a lot of balancing.
Yeah, and I think one point that surfaced yesterday when I was doing this program, the first few modules with this client, one of the things that they surfaced was, and this goes to, I think, our 4th episode around how to identify, recruit, onboard, and develop these types of leaders, is how does an organization run when you've got more than one disruptive leader in it? And so again, it still comes from, sorry, James, if you're listening, but I still maintain my point, which is the organization has to decide how it treats disruptive leaders, how it defines them, and what role it wants them to play. Because if you create that environment, disruptive leaders can actually empower each other. They can complement one another. It's like when you have two alphas in a room. They'll only butt heads when they're not secure in who they are and when they're jostling for position and power. Disruptive leaders don't jostle in position for power. They position for how everyone can be empowered to deliver against their own purpose, the wider organization's goals. And so I say it again, disruptive leaders, they challenge, they're entrepreneurial in their mindset. To your point, Simon, they're growth focused. But I think underpinning it all is they want to empower those that work with them and alongside them. right? And I think that's a very important point that a lot of us miss when we think about this term, because we do think of it as a negative still. But now what would happen if we reframed our view of that and said, actually, given the right conditions and we have disruptive leaders in our midst, if we saw them as a source of empowerment, what might that do for our productivity individually, organizationally, our ROI from our investments in products, services, whatever we're doing? And what might that do for us if we want to position ourselves as an organization or an employer of choice? I mean, I ask everyone that's listening to this, what might that do?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And absolutely. And
just finish that train of thought, because the reason I say all that, Simon, I mentioned in episode 1 and 2 this little thing called the Global Innovation Index, and that's every year there's a report that goes out that assesses how innovative countries are around the world. And at the core of their research is to say ongoing innovation at a country level will be determined, lean in everybody, by the ability of organizations to embrace disruptive talent.
Yeah.
So our ability hinges on that. So I guess the role and the value of these kinds of leaders, we need to be setting at the macro level, and we need to then create the environment at the micro level to bring them in and harness their full value and potential.
Yeah, no, it's great to see we're getting comments from Angola, Poland, India, Dubai, US, across the globe. And I guess that brings me on to another train of thought. And I don't know whether it's part of what we discussed, but in my experience, accomplished leaders need to be problem solvers, right? And I know problem has a negative connotation, but what I mean is that I often talk about the two I's: intuition and instinct. And so from my perspective, really good leaders seem to tap into their intuition, which is based on their culture, their upbringing, their genetics, plus their instinct, which is their experiences, right? And learning from mistakes, which comes from, and then obviously talking to others, and then making fact-based decisions, embracing the fact that they're never going to have all the information, and then they seem to be good at delivering what seems to be an easy to follow solution, and then stay on target, right? So are we saying disruptive leaders are good problem solvers, or is it not as reductive as that?
I was going to add another I actually to your model, because you've got intuition, instinct, and I was going to say intrinsic. So they are intrinsically motivated. So Daniel Pink talks about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivators. The way to find, keep, and develop and make disruptive leaders flourish is to tap into what motivates them internally, their intrinsic motivators. But to your point, from a problem-solving perspective, because they can anticipate what's on the horizon, they demonstrate that contextual intelligence that Korn Ferry's research has also talked about. They can make quick judgments around opportunities, help with viability analysis, help to determine whether these ideas will be viable. So by virtue of what I've just said, they have to be good problem solvers. And not just that, because they create the conditions for everyone to feel empowered and embraced, they actually create the environment for other people to bring their approaches to problem solving too. So again, it's not like I speak the loudest, I'm the disruptive leader in the room, everybody needs to approach the problem from my angle. They create the environment for everybody to discuss challenges in a forward-looking, solution-focused way. Yeah. And because of that, that problem-solving ideation leads to a flow of ideas, a constant sense of innovation. So yes, in a nutshell, disruptive leaders, if they're allowed to be, can be efficient problem solvers. And I say the word allowed in italics and underlined. If I could shout that, I would. I was going to say, Paul, have you really worked in any organizations where this is fully allowed, or do you just see sort of little whiffs of possibility in organizations? Yeah, right at the heart of what I do is, as a practice, is talking about the untalkable, which means talking about the hypocrisy inherent and that characterizes our approaches to the way we identify, recruit, onboard, and develop talent and leaders? So the answer is no. I haven't fully seen it, because what I've seen is organizations spend millions of pounds and millions of dollars advocating that they need different types of thinkers, different types of leaders, divergent thinkers, cognitively diverse problem solvers. And then when they bring them in, it's almost like false advertising. They haven't created the conditions in the organization to fully embrace that kind of talent. So I see a lot of talk and a lot less action in every organization that I've worked in. Everybody can put the one-page mission statement on the wall, but not everybody actually lives by what that statement says.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We got a great comment there from somebody in Kenya. Innovation goes hand in hand with agility. If organizations are not able to adapt new ideas and willing to try and fail, then progress is impacted. I'd say progress is inevitably stymied. Innovation comes with an element of risk, and to progress, we must maintain a reasonable level of risk appetite. And that's profound, I think. And, there's another thing that I just want to mention. And I think it's easy to blame. It's easy to blame companies and structures and paradigms. But at the end of the day, these are human decisions, aren't they? I mean, we either decide. What I mean by that is, I often in my training refer to a report that McKinsey's it's been doing for decades, right? And they talk about the 7 key blockages within organizations, and they exist in every organization, from the biggest company down to the corner shop, and their communication issues, change management issues, team building issues, tech, culture, lack of a vision, and not having the right employees, right? That they're the same challenges everywhere. But the question I ask people is, knowing that, are you a blocker? Are you the sort of person who perpetuates these challenges, or are you an enabler? And so does it come down to that? It's not. I think it's easy to blame organizations and structures, but really this is about human choice, isn't it?
And that human choice is either affirmed, reinforced, or rejected by the systems that they work within. And so, I'm sure we don't have time to delve into this whole concept of self-managing organizational structures that's being pioneered by Frederick Laloux in his work, Reinventing Organizations. But one of the things his work and others that follow him show is that when you take away the hierarchy, the walls, the boundaries, the silos, people actually work better. Yes, you do still have the nuances and the little, tit for tat and conflict and everything. You will not ever eradicate that. I would never suggest that we can. But it's almost like the antidote to that is found in the least obvious place, which is the disruptive leader. Right? Yeah. It's actually that's the fly in the ointment. The disruptive leader is the person that is the catalyst to pull this full circle, is the catalyst for change, Simon, because they are driven by human values, human motivations. And so, yes, you're right. I mean, we can be a blocker or an enabler. Yeah. I've seen that disruptive leaders want to be enablers, yet the systems and processes that they work within or feel they inherit in an organization are the blockers. So I guess this is a philosophical question. It comes back to Thomas Hobbes of the 17th century. Is man inherently good or evil, really? And so when we join an organization, do we say everything about purpose and values just to get recruited, or do we really actually join an organization because we align with their values and purpose as well as ours? The future organization, the future of work, and the currency of the future of leadership will increasingly require us to be more human-centered. And and pardon my French, but you can't fake that shit, right? Yeah. So anyone that's offended by swearing, I apologize. Get quite passionate.
Yeah, no, and so amazingly, we've run out of time. It's just flown by, and we've had an amazing amount of input here. And so, in our final session, we're going to get into, you kind of alluded to it today. How do organizations, which is for me the crux of this, how do organizations who are interested in, taking a leap, no matter how big or small to start with, how do they identify, cultivate, and embrace disruptive leaders? What do they need to do to identify them, to cultivate them, and to embrace them? And I won't ask what you think about that, Paul, because we'll leave it to next time. But thanks everybody for the comments. Do you have any final comments on today, leadership and catalysts for change, etc.?
Well, just a roundup. If we're saying, if I was to advise anyone about the role, if you're sitting out there, you're listening to this live, or but at some other point, and you're thinking, well, what is the role of a disruptive leader, and what value can they bring? Let me just give you a couple of things as takeaways. So if you're thinking of, in terms of the role that they can play in your organization, anything to do with innovation, anything to do with prototyping quickly, anything to do with change, and anything to do with anticipating transformation, as well as building trust within organizations. The role of a disruptive leader fits right into that. And in terms of that leads to the value that they bring, which is better retention, better engagement, better productivity, and a better ROI for your organization, whether that's financial or any other ROI metric. But it does hinge on what we're going to talk about in the next episode, which is how do you then identify and bring them in and keep them in your organization? Because you have to create the conditions.
Absolutely. You need to attract them. You need to, absolutely. Well, thanks, Paul. And so looking forward to the next session. And thanks everybody from Angola, Kenya, India, Poland, US, UK, Ireland. It's been a great take up for this session. So thanks again, and see everybody next time. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.